Job chapter 16. We will be looking at verses 1 through 5 tonight. By way of introduction, we find Job having gone through all of the trials that the devil had thrown his way to try to get him to turn from God. And at this time in the story of Job, you find that Job's friends come with the intention to comfort him. But as you read through the chapters that record the conversations between Job's friends and Job himself, you find that there weren't very many comforting words being said by Job's friends. And with that being said, we find ourselves looking at Job tonight, having just finished listening to one of his friends named Eliphaz. And what we're going to do tonight is we're going to look at Job's response to Eliphaz, and we're going to learn a few things on how we as Christians should speak to those around us. We're going to look at Eliphaz, and we're going to see what he said to Job, and then we're going to see how Job responds to Eliphaz. And some of the things that Job points out that we as Christians should take to heart, and how we speak to each other, but most importantly, how we speak to the world. And one of the biggest things I'd like to say tonight to start off is that in our world today, those things that people used to say in secret are those things that people are saying very readily. And as we go year after year after year, you find that it's not just adults that are saying things that they shouldn't be saying. It's not just adults that are lying and not caring about it. It's not just adults that are gossiping and not caring about it. It's not just adults that are saying every cuss word in the book and not caring anything about it. Every year that goes by, it seems like it's just another grade younger and another grade younger and another grade younger of young kids saying things that they should not say. And so in a world where those things that used to be said in secret are becoming those things that are said in the commonplace, it's vitally important that we as Christians think before we speak and really consider the fact that the world watches everything that we say and that we do, and that our speech tells the world a lot about us. And if we can guard the things that we say, and the world can see that there is something distinctly different about how we say things and what we say to each other and how we conduct ourselves, that is going to be a tremendous tool to being able to reach those people for Christ. And so tonight, the first thing that we're going to look at, well, let me give you the title so I don't jump ahead of myself, but the title is interesting. Human or Subhuman? I did that title to kind of be catchy. Because with what I said before, in our generation today, with young people saying things they ought not to say, and with the wickedness that used to be really behind closed doors being in plain sight today, people treat each other through their speech as if they're subhuman. They don't speak to each other with respect anymore. They don't speak to each other as they should, which we are an image of God. He made us in His likeness. And so we ought to speak to each other with that in mind. Not speaking to each other demeaningly, not speaking to each other in a grotesque way, but speaking about each other, speaking to each other in a way that's Christ-honoring, but also befitting for who we are as people. Not speaking to people as if they're subhuman, but speaking to them as if they are, which they are, human beings created in the image of God. And so with that being said, the first thing that we can glean from Job and his response, I'll read all 5 verses and then we'll jump back to verse number 1. Job chapter 16 and verse number 1. The Bible says, "Then Job answered and said, I have heard many such things, miserable comforters are ye all. Shall vain words have an end? Or what emboldeneth thee that thou answerest? I also could speak as ye do. If your soul were in my soul's stead, I could heap up words against you and shake mine head at you. But I would strengthen you with my mouth, and the moving of my lips should assuage your grief. That word assuage, it means to alleviate, mitigate, or relieve. Basically what Job is saying is, I would be sitting here seeking to do my very best to make this situation much easier for you, which we'll get to that here in a minute. But I want to focus on verse number 1. Verse number 1. Job says, then, or Job chapter 12, verse number 1 says, then Job answered and said. I like how the verse starts with then Job answered and said. I know tonight, and I can think right off the bat, of many times that I've been talking to my wife. And I think I know where she's going with what she's asking or what she's saying, and I respond, thinking I know where she's going or what she's saying. And in reality, that's not where she was going or what she was saying. But what's really interesting to me is that this is something that we do not just to, let's say, our husbands or wives or our children, but even to fellow Christians. Let's say that me and Caleb have a disagreement about something in the Bible. And let's say that between that disagreement, I struck a wrong chord with Caleb. I said something that I didn't really think was bad, but to Caleb, that was pretty hurting. And so as time goes on, Caleb continues to think about it. It continues to fester, and it continues to make him angrier and angrier and more frustrated. And him being a good Christian comes to me, and he begins to tell me, look, this is what you said, and this is how you said it, and this is how I took it. You know what Job is saying here at verse number 1? It says, then Job answered and said, he's saying, look, listen until the person's done talking, and then respond. If I'm going to do right by Caleb, if I'm going to humble myself and realize that I very well could have said something I should not have said, or I could have done something to Caleb that was wrong, then the best thing that I can do as a Christian is to listen to everything that he says, and as I'm listening to him, think, what is the proper response? And as I'm listening to him, not looking somewhere else, but engaging with him and making sure he understands, look, I'm listening to you, I hear that you have a grievance with me, and I understand the situation. And there's no problem with, after that conversation takes place, with me saying to Caleb, look, I can't give you an answer right now. That would be wise of me as a Christian to do that. But also, it'd be wise of me as a Christian in the first place to listen to everything that he says first before I respond. Many times we as Christians do ourselves an injustice whenever a situation like that happens between us and another believer, and instead of listening to everything that they say, we cut them off and we say what we think they're saying, which makes the situation even worse. But I want you to take that and apply that to the world around us. Let's say that we're doing something at our job and a non-believer sees us, and let's say that we say something that we know we shouldn't have said. It wasn't necessarily bad, but it was something that a non-believer would be like, that's not really something a Christian would say. And they come to us and they start explaining that to us. Would it be better for us to listen to everything that they say, or would it be better for us to just start chalking it up to them and saying, oh, well, it was just an accident. It was just a one-time thing. Or, oh, well, I had a bad day. Or this happened. Would it be better for us to listen to everything they're saying and then respond? Or would it be better for us to make an excuse as to why we said something that might not have necessarily been the worst, but it might not have been the best? See, Job is getting across a very, very good point. And look, Job's at the lowest point of his life. He's had everything taken away from him. He's got these close friends that he thought he could rely on, and they're coming to him, and really, instead of encouraging him like they thought they were discouraging him. And even in the midst of all that, he listens very closely and attentively to Eliphaz, and then he responds. That is something that we as Christians should do both to each other and to the world around us. Being willing to take some time to listen and to think, and then, like I said, either respond at the end of them saying their piece or asking them to give you more time to respond. It's important that we as Christians realize that we're not always going to say everything right. That even if we thought we said everything right, we could have said something wrong. There's always room for improvement as a Christian. And one of the most helpful things for us would be to listen attentively, then respond. And that's what Job simply shows us here in verse number 1. But look at verse number 2. He goes on and he says something else. Verse number 2, I have heard many such things. He goes on to say to Eliphaz, I've heard these things before. And what Job is saying to Eliphaz is this. Look, what you're saying to me, which, let me tell you what he said, excuse me. Eliphaz expressed to Job in chapter 15 that because of Job's current situation, he must have sinned. He must have done some detestable things for God to have done what he did to him. And Job sits there and he says, look, this isn't something that I haven't heard before. This isn't something that we haven't had a conversation about before this time. This isn't something that I haven't thought of. But I can tell you assuredly that I'm as right with God as I possibly can be. If you look in Job chapter 1, what does it say about Job? It says that he eschewed evil. It goes into also telling us that anytime his kids ever were together, he was making sacrifices for them, an atonement for any sin that they could potentially be doing, unawares to him, but also unaware to themselves. Where Job is at this time, he's saying, look, Eliphaz, I have heard all of these things. I have gone over all of these things in my own mind. How many times do we say to fellow believers what I would call a Christian cliche? We see a fellow believer who's gone through something tough, who's endured a lot of tribulations, who just seems to be going through another thing and another thing and another thing, and they just keep getting knocked down. And we say, look, God's not going to give you any more than you can handle. Is that the best thing to say at that time? Or we might say another Christian cliche. I can't think of all of them right now. And I'm sure there's probably a dozen that are coming to your own minds. But so often, we say something that is typical as opposed to something that is necessary. It goes back to verse number 1. What does Job do? He listens intently, and then he speaks. It's so important for us as Christians to listen intently to those who talk to us, whether believer or non-believer, whether grievance or non-grievance, and then to respond, but then also not to just say something because that's what everyone else says, but to say something with meaning, to say something with sustenance, to say something that leaves the person in a place where you have, just like we said with verse number 5, where it says that he assuaged, that we've alleviated the situation. So not only does he say, I've heard many such things, he also goes into saying in verse number 2, miserable comforters are ye all. Just think about it for one moment. Job tells Eliphaz very clearly, and all of his friends, you came here with the intention to help me, but you're standing here hurting me. How many times have we done the same thing to fellow Christians? We said a cliche, or we spoke without thinking. We did more harm than good. We did something that we weren't intending to do initially, but we ended up doing it. Job simply says this, listen, think, then speak. Don't say vain things. Don't say something that isn't going to bring any comfort or help. And if there is a situation that comes up, and the applications for this are many, but just look at that last part of that verse one more time. It says, miserable comforters are ye all. What if the world were to look at you and your interactions with other Christians, or your interactions with the non-believers that you work with, and they were to utter that statement? How much of a detriment would that be to your witness to them? If they simply said, miserable comforters are ye, are you. When people see you interacting with others around you, especially those that do not know Christ, do they see that you listen to what the person's saying and actually seek to say something with meaning to comfort them and or to fix the situation? Or do you just chalk it up to a mistake, or you just say something that everyone else says? Can they look at you and not be able to say, a miserable comforter are you. If they could look at you and say, you are someone who cares more deeply about me than anyone else, and you can say, you know why I care about you so deeply? Because Christ cares about you so deeply. And because Christ cared so deeply about me and you, he sent his son to die for you so that you may have life. And you can go into sharing the gospel with them. There are so many opportunities for us to share the gospel with people. And this is one of those fantastic avenues of doing that. Being able to show people that we care and that we're there can make a world of a difference for the opportunities that we have to share the gospel with them. And so Job in verse number 1 simply shows us that we ought to listen and then speak. He goes into saying we should say something with sustenance. We shouldn't just say something, that just is a cliche. And then we should also look to seriously comfort those that we're speaking to, not to just say something. Look at verse number 3. Verse number 3 starts off by saying, shall vain words have an end? Basically what Job is going into saying as well is that the words that you're saying, Eliphaz, they're like the wind that blows by in the day. It has no meaning. You came to comfort me, but I feel no comfort. You came to help me, but I have no help. You came and you said things that have no tangible meaning. We as Christians, in talking to each other and speaking to each other and speaking about each other and talking to the people that we work with and speaking about the people we work with, should always be saying those things that are meaningful and that are right, not those things that are like the wind that blows by you in the day, something that's not meaningful, something that has no tangibleness to it. So Job very clearly goes into just explaining to Eliphaz, look, I know you're here and you're trying to say things that are comforting, but everything you're saying is like the wind that blows by me in the day. It doesn't mean anything. Look at the latter end of verse number 3. It says, shall vain words have an end, or what emboldeneth thee that thou answerest? So Job goes on to also say, look, Eliphaz, I don't know what I did. I don't know what I did to you. I don't know what I did to you guys as friends. I don't know in what conversation we had previous to this that you thought that you should attack me like this. I don't know what I've done. That's what he's saying to Eliphaz. Look, I don't know why you're saying this to me. Anytime we've ever talked about anything before this, we've always talked like normal people. We've always had good conversations. We've always gleaned wisdom from each other. We've always spoken in a proper way. And then all of a sudden, you're talking to me like I'm some low person, like I'm some destitute, like I'm some wicked, worthless person? Why? Where's that coming from? Have we ever said anything like that to a fellow Christian? Have we ever spoken in such a way that's how they felt? Have we ever spoken in such a way that that's how someone that doesn't know anything about Christ has felt because of something we said to them directly or said about someone else that they know? Would they utter the same thing? What provoked you to speak so harshly about me? Why should we as Christians who have been given so much ever utter a detestable word about any other, especially another Christian? I can tell you one thing's for sure. The Lord doesn't take lightly to things like that. That's not something we should take lightly to either. We should speak those things that are uplifting and helpful and tangible to Christians and non-believers. And I'm really not trying to sit here and preach a message or teach a lesson tonight with this, you need to do this. I'm simply pointing out what Job is obviously saying, that we ought to think before we speak. And when we speak, we ought to say those things that are beneficial and helpful and tangible, not vain, not unnecessary, and not things that have no weight or meaning. Look at verse number 4. He goes in to say, I also could speak as ye do, If your soul were in my soul's stead, I could heap up words against you and shake mine head at you. The main thing I want you to get from verse number 4 is, I also could speak as ye do. Job goes in and says, listen, if you were in my place and I was in your place, I could say the same things to you. I could say that it's because of the sin of the past that you are where you are. Or, let's look at verse number 5. But, he says, I would strengthen you with my mouth, and the moving of my lips should assuage your grief. Once again, what does assuage mean? It means to make something less intense or severe. Job says, listen, rather than going to you at a low point like this and saying that it's because of your sin that you are where you are, I would instead lend you a helping hand. Whenever we see fellow Christians enduring the consequence of their sin, would it not be better for us to go to them with a helping hand as opposed to going to them and saying, you're in this situation and it's your fault. You did this to yourself. That's why you are where you are. We may not mean to say that, but often enough, when we say something to them without thinking, that's the impression that we give. You are where you are because of what you've done. And a lot of times we'll say, I'm praying for you. And we never utter a prayer for them. Instead of going to them at that time and lending them that helping hand and saying, look, I don't know what you've done that has gotten you here, but I can assuredly tell you this, you're not alone. Just like the Lord would never turn his back to you, no matter how many times you turn away from him, no matter how many times you do something you shouldn't do, in much the same manner, even if you were to do something wrong to me, even if you were to do this same sin again, and even if you were to find yourself in the same position, you know who's going to be standing here lending you a helping hand? I will. And not only that, I'm going to do whatever I can as the Lord is to relieve you of what you're feeling, even though it's the right consequence for what you've done. Never uttering that. Only telling them that I'm there to help. Job very clearly expresses to Eliphaz, what you're doing right now, you may be doing with the best intention in mind, but it's not the best thing to be done. It's better for you to do like I would. Not to say that in an arrogant way like Job's not saying. He's not saying it in an arrogant way. He's simply saying, look, this is the alternative. To go to someone, whether in a low place because of a lifetime of sin, whether it be a Christian who's tripped up in sin, and lending a helping hand. And rather than going to them and just saying something, going to them and saying, is there anything that I can do? Is there anything that can be done to help you? A lot of times we'll go to someone and we'll think of something quick to say, like something that we think is comforting. And in all reality, they may just want you to sit there with them. You know what Job ends up saying later on in Job? He says to his friends, I just wanted you to come and sit with me. I didn't want you to say anything at all. I wanted you to come and simply comfort me. Very clearly, we can see from Job that we don't even really need to say something most times. We simply just need to go to the person and let them know that we're there, and let them know that we care, and let them know that no matter what happens, we're still going to be there. And not to say anything at all, but to just simply know or help them know that you care. We as Christians have such a wonderful opportunity to show people that there is a perfect alternative to saying things in the negative about people, but to rather say things in the positive about people. Rather than looking at the negative things about someone, looking at the positive things about someone. Rather than giving in and saying the same old cliches or giving in and saying some horrible things about your boss or about another coworker that doesn't work. Not giving in to any of those things and rather saying things that are appropriate, saying things that are right, and saying things that are good, and saying things that are true, and saying those things so often that the people you work with say, he couldn't say a single bad thing about even Hitler. Because he cares so much about the opportunities that he has to reach us, he's not even going to say one bad thing about us, even if it's well-deserved. Job very clearly and very simply shows us, I would say, this final takeaway. Speak only things that are kind and refined. Say things that uplift, encourage, and help, but also say things that the world would look at and say, that's something that only a Christian would say. That's something that I want. We have a wonderful opportunity to be an example to the lost and to bring them to Christ, but we also have a wonderful opportunity as Christians to do something for each other that the world doesn't do. To rather than backbite, to rather than discourage, to rather than gossip, to rather than lie, to encourage, to uplift, to exhort, to strengthen, and to be there for each other. This world is tough. This life is tough. We as Christians should be doing our very best in what we say to each other to encourage each other as we go through this life, so we can find great success, but so we can also lead the lost to Christ. So tonight, very simply, and just a very simple takeaway, just speak those things to the best of your ability to those that have even grieved you, those things that are kind and those things that are refined. And see how God does something very, very, very unique through what you say to those around you, whether Christian or non-Christian. Tonight's message isn't long, but it doesn't always have to be. Just keep in mind what you say and how you say it. Let's pray.